Hi, my name is Brent Morehouse. I'm a concerned citizen, perhaps like you, paying attention to debates going back and forth about the debt ceiling increase, albeit with some disgust and distrust. Anyway, it's done. This is the bill. It's the deficit reduction bill. It's the Budget Act of 2011. And I'd like to talk to you about some of the things in this bill that well, really were disgusting, and it lends to a lot of distrust. But before I get to that, I want to stop here for a quick minute and suggest that this debt crisis, this financial crisis that we're in right now, is simply a symptom of a larger problem. It's not all about money. Certainly, our standard of living is in jeopardy. However, I would suggest to you that our standard of living has always come from our personal freedoms and liberties, not the other way around. We don't get our freedom from our finances. We get our standard of living from our personal freedom and liberties, and that is what's under attack by a growing, corrupt, I believe, central government that is inching its way into every aspect of our lives. Now, I actually think a name for this bill ought to be the Disgust and Distrust bill. The first thing that I don't know if you're aware of is that this bill, you know what, this debt ceiling debate is a hot potato for Congress. They don't like it. And what they did is they passed it to the president. This bill now gives the president the authority to increase our debt limit. Did you know that? Not too many years ago, Congress was tired of another hot potato, and that was when they voted for their pay increases, and it was just politically embarrassing for them, and they didn't like taking the heat for it, and so they passed a bill that would make their pay raises automatic, and so they don't have to vote for that anymore. That's the same thing they did with the debt limit increase. In fact, if we go to page 32 in this bill, or page 30, what they call it now is the debt ceiling disapproval process. What they have done is now it will take an act of Congress to stop the debt ceiling from being raised, instead of an act of Congress to raise it. They've given the authority to the president. As soon as we're within $100 billion of our max credit limit, the president can simply authorize the Treasury to increase our borrowing to get more money through the Fed. And the only thing that would stop it is an act of Congress. So no, Congress can just sit back and do nothing, and the debt limit increases. In fact, we won't probably even hear about it. That certainly is an area of disgust in this bill. Something else I want to talk to you about, which leads me to distrust, is that all of these cuts, remember this was supposed to be a $2.4 trillion debt increase for a balanced approach of $2.4 trillion in deficit reduction, right? Well, these numbers that they've come up with to cut the first $900 billion are based on President Obama's budget that projects a $9.4 trillion increase in our debt. That's right, $9.4 trillion from 2012 to 2021. And the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, has put out a baseline report regarding that budget, and that's what these numbers are based on. And it says it in this actual bill that they're using the CBO's baseline projections. And so that really caused me to question the accuracy of the CBO. I mean, how accurate are they? So I pulled up the CBO's baseline projection reports for the previous 10 years. They did the same thing for 2002 through 2011, a 10-year projection. And what I found is they have projected that revenues would be $27.8 trillion for that 10-year period. Expenses to be 2.2 trillion for that 10-year period, with a net reduction in our debt by 5.6 trillion. In fact, our public debt was supposed to be gone this year, based on the CBO's projections. In reality, revenue was about $6 trillion less. Expenses were $6 trillion more. So instead of a $5.6 trillion reduction in our debt, which basically would wipe away our public debt from that point, we had a $6.2 trillion increase in our public debt for a total difference of $11.8 trillion in more debt. That's how far they were off. Now, what's interesting about this is that the CBO comes out with revisions to their forecasting and their budgets based on concepts and new definitions. Well, that's also in this bill. On page 7, it says that when the president submits the budget, it shall include adjustments to these spending limits based on up-to-date concepts and definitions. In other words, these numbers are funny numbers. I mean, they're numbers that they know the CBO is going to have to adjust monthly almost. In fact, the CBO, from their August 2010 projections, okay, this is just 6 months ago, August of 2010, they had projected what the deficit or the increase to our debt would be for 2011. That's where we are right now. From August, they were off by a half $500 billion. And so these numbers, these spending limits, number one, are based on a budget that President Obama submitted that the Democrats couldn't even pass. You know, we haven't had a budget in almost 900 days, 2.5 years. The Democrats, when they controlled the House and the Senate and the White House, wouldn't pass this budget. It was so wacky. But that's the budget we're using for the supposed $900 billion in cuts. Now, the next thing is, okay, what about this other $1.5 trillion in cuts to balance out? Remember, we're supposed to have $2.4 trillion in debt increase and $2.4 trillion in deficit reductions. So that leaves $1.5 trillion that we have to cut after this $900 billion. Well, on page 52, it says that, well, the goal is $1.5 trillion. It's a goal. And on page 32, where we actually enact this by this super Congress that's created, that's something else that's disgusting and is very distrustful, is that they've created a 12-member joint committee between the House and the Senate to come up with this deficit reduction package. But on page 32, where it defines that, it stipulates a requirement of $1.2 trillion. So immediately right there, $300 billion was just taken off the table. In addition, we're going to take off 18% off the top for interest on the debt for that deficit amount. 18%. So that $1.5 trillion got a haircut to $1.2 trillion, and then that $1.2 trillion got an 18% haircut to $984 billion. In addition to that, it might be comprised entirely of tax increases. It doesn't have to be a cut to these funny numbers anyway. In summary, Congress punted. They gave the president authority to increase our debt limit. In fact, Congress doesn't even have to act any longer. They can simply let the president increase our debt whenever we reach within $100 billion of our maximum credit limit. The first $900 billion in deficit reduction, these supposed cuts, are based on a bloated budget that couldn't even be passed by the Democrats in 2009 and 2010. That budget, based on the CBO's estimated projections will add $9.4 trillion in new debt over the next 10 years. Also, the adjustments to the spending limits defined in this bill will be changed based on up-to-date concepts and definitions, whatever that means. The remaining $1.5 trillion in deficit reductions actually is $984 billion, and it could also be comprised entirely of tax increases. Now, something else I'd like to bring up. For all of this, the Vice President of the United States is reported to have called the Tea Party members, the Tea Party groups, organizers, terrorists. The Vice President of the United States, a terrorist. You know, a terrorist is someone who kills indiscriminately against innocents, women, children, strapping bombs onto themselves, onto innocent people. That is what the Tea Party is being called. Now, granted, I know it's Joe Biden, okay? I mean, I don't know if he even realizes he's the VP yet. I mean, I think he has suspicions. But it's not just Joe Biden, it was other congressional members that were calling the Tea Partiers terrorists. Think about that. Today, they call you a terrorist. When will they start treating you like a terrorist? It's unbelievable to me. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're a part of the Tea Party movement. You know, you're watching this video. If you are, I would suggest to you that this mantra of limited government and responsible government, and we've all heard it, we've all said it, but I would suggest to you that it means nothing, especially when holding these officials accountable. The politicians actually love it because they can all say, yeah, I'm for limited government and I'm for responsible government. We must get specific about the reforms that we seek. Then we will know the path to the reforms. This was signed off by Republicans and Democrats, okay? Mitch McConnell, you know, on this whole issue of passing the authority to the president, he explained it this way. Mitch McConnell, this is ABC News, it says, Mitch McConnell says this debt ceiling debate will be a template for all future debt ceiling hikes, and declared that the conservatives, the Tea Party, won. Can you believe that? He was such a coward, he couldn't admit that, hey, we passed this ball to the president. We don't have to deal with it anymore because we don't want to. That's how he explained that. Senator McCain called the Tea Party caucus in Congress hobbits. I don't even understand that analogy. Hobbits were, you know, the little creatures in the Lord of the Rings novels and books or in movies. I don't get it, but obviously it was a slant on the Tea Party movement. And let me explain why they are so furious. They are used to operating in the dark. We are shining the light on their activities, and it freaks them out. It's like the cockroaches when you turn the lights on. They don't like it. And so these attacks on the Tea Party movement, on Americans that want some sanity brought back to our government, are being called terrorists. Now, if you're not part of the Tea Party movement, and only thing you hear about the Tea Party movement is from the press, you're not getting the full picture at all. I would suggest that you pick up Tea Party: The Awakening. It's a book I put out last fall. The first part of it goes deep into our history, and it shows what's going on today and why, and how the same things happened in the 1770s. These two movements, they're separated by 240 years, but linked by amazing similarities in economics, in the political parties then and now, and in the actions of the government. Thank you.